I'm going to roll with Heidegger, so I'm going to keep going into Robert Avens, the new Gnosis, Heidegger, Hillman, and Angels. And we're up to chapter 4, Language, Poetry, Art. And it's section 1, Language as Saying of the Gods. Okay, so how did Heidegger think about language? Let's find out. Heidegger's thinking on language is part and parcel of his central project to overcome metaphysical dualism in all its guises. In the dualistic tradition, the truest word is the verbum mentis, the mental word or meaning, which is pressing the internal outward into the external. Quote unquote, language speaks of sensible things, which are taken to be symbolic of the supersensible. In this view, language is essentially expression and a means of communication. Okay, so Avens is talking about a particular notion of what language is. And this is what Heidegger wants to reject. So what does Avens say? He says, to Heidegger, words are not signs of things, nor are concepts signs of words. Things are not prior to words, and words are not labels added to already existing things. Quote, words and language are not holes into which we pack things for purposes of speech or correspondence. It is in the word and in language that things become and are things. Okay, so we don't really have a sense of what's going on here yet. We have to wait and see what Heidegger is going to say to us about his notion of language that is different from what he's pushing on is the way that we use language to sort of just label things. And the things are obvious and they're there. Like here, look, fork and sticky notes and headphones and so on, or earbuds. And Heidegger wants to reject this. He feels that there's something more essential or fundamental about language that he's going to try to reveal, and we have to stick with him enough to give him space to do that. He's not an easy one, Heidegger. Avens says, Heidegger's experience of language is rooted in what he calls saying. Contrary to the conventional assumption that saying is posterior to knowing, meaning that we know and then we say, Heidegger holds that saying is anterior to knowing, that we say first and know after. Okay? The communicative and informative function of language is only an incidental trait derived from its essential function, which is to name anything that is, human or non-human. Only where there is language is there a world. As Vicenius puts it, Vincent Vicenius, quote, words primarily are not like camera pictures of previously existing things. In words, things are brought from their concealment. They begin to be. Okay, so again, this is quite difficult. This is hard to grasp what is meant by this. So there's a way of trying to describe what Heidegger means by our language, which is not primarily about communicating and informing, which is a certain function which is sort of incidental and derived from a more essential function. What is that more essential function of language? It's called to name anything. What is meant by this? The idea is that words show, they reveal, they call forth, they bring things from their concealment, they bring things into being. So language seems to have this quality of presencing that which we're talking about, making it real, making it apparent to us. And the communicating about something and informing about it is secondary. Let's keep trying to grasp what Heidegger means by language. I think one way to get at this is to focus on that saying and knowing distinction. There's a way that when we say something, we in a sense we say that first, and that calls to mind the knowledge of what we're talking about. Difficult, difficult, difficult. Avens says, in Heidegger's famous phrase, which has become a catchword among both his admirers and detractors, language is the house of being. Language is the house of being. This is not a hasty image, he says. It means that things are revealed by traversing the house. In other words, we can talk because we have a pre-ontological understanding of being. There's a way that we live in language as the house of being. Okay, so what is meant by this? He's talking about the way that we live in language. I don't know, don't quite know how to describe that. It's probably better to read Heidegger in the original than trying to get a sense of him in this way. But I'll keep going on. Avens says, in other words, we can talk because we have a pre-ontological understanding of being. We live in language as the house of being. When we go through the forest, we always go through the word forest, even though we do not pronounce this word or even think about anything linguistic. Indeed, being itself is linguistic. A thing comes to be, i.e., to appear, only through language. And where there is no word, there's nothing. Language lets things be. As the poet Stephen George writes, so I renounced and sadly see where word breaks off, no thing may be. Okay, so Heidegger is talking about a kind of a structure that is within our being, that is before our ontology, before our sort of metaphysics of the world that we live in. And it's before our knowledge of the world. And there's a way that this is a kind of what would you say, pre-ontological understanding. It's a structure that again undergirds our awareness. And he feels that it's linguistic, and it can be understood as a kind of pre-reflective or pre-conceptual mind that we inhabit. And we move through this world of concepts, even when we go out and about in the actual physical world. Again, we live in language as the house of being. When we go through the forest, we always go through the word forest, even though we don't pronounce this word or even think about anything linguistic. There's a way that our experience of being in the forest presupposes the language in which the term forest is. There's a way that that term, even if we don't think it, even if we don't pronounce it, it forms a structure within our being. And we live within that structure when we inhabit the forest, when we go through it. This is really difficult, but I'm going to keep going, even though it's hard. So again, the invitation is to, first of all, try to be a bit familiar with Heidegger before encountering this. Try to encounter the text yourself and stay with it. Don't need to have the answers straight away. We're trying to understand what Heidegger means by this deeper sense of language that he's trying to describe. We're hoping that Avens will help us. Avens continues, and it's not that long of a section. He says, In the conversation with a Japanese visitor, Heidegger suggests that saying is related to Tao, the key word in Lao Tzu's poetic thinking. Tao as in Taoism. Tao, which is beyond the distinction of subject and object, is perhaps the mystery of mysteries of thoughtful saying. So there's a connection between Tao and what Heidegger means by thinking, saying, which is what language is rooted within. So what does Heidegger mean by this saying? Saying as Tao means to show, to make appear, the lighting, concealing, releasing, offer of world. Saying releases, that is, lets the world be in its pure phenomenality. Okay, so there's a certain aspect of our saying, of our speaking, which is that when we call something, when we name something, I would say, when we say something, there's a quality of releasing. It brings something into, it allows it to shine forth. It reveals it. So again, saying releases, that is, it lets the world be in its pure phenomenality. I would say that when we say things, we can be with the phenomena of things. They appear that way when we say them. Let's keep going and see what else we can find. Avens says, according to Heidegger, then, language, as saying, is not human speech, not primarily a human faculty at all, but that which enables man to stand in the openness of things or in the world. Okay, you can even kind of hear this in the quality of my speaking. Like when we normally speak, I could just be, having a conversation, trying to convey some information. It's a communicative function of language. But this way of speaking that is more Heideggerian is a way of trying to say what is being meant in a way that speaks it forth, in a way that releases it, in a way that shows it, in a way that allows the world to appear in that way, the way that is being said. It's difficult. It's really difficult. But I'm hoping that one can feel that there is a different sense of language, that language is being spoken differently. It's being said. As Heidegger says, saying releases, that is, lets the world be in its pure phenomenality. And this isn't our normal human speech. It's not primarily a human faculty at all. It has a function. It enables man to stand in the openness of things. So it has a releasing, opening quality. And for Heidegger, this is what creates the world. So language is the house of being. It is an illusion to think that man invented language. Man does not invent language any more than he invents being itself. The only thing he can do is to respond to the address of being in language. It is not man who speaks, but language. For language is in its essence neither expression nor an activity of man. Language speaks. There's a kind of what's being gotten at here is it's the kind of sense that language comes through us, that language isn't exactly something that we do. It's not exactly something that we invented. It's something that happens. Language speaks itself. I forget someone said our language is a virus from outer space. Avens continues. In Hillman's writings, there are only occasional remarks on language. Generally speaking, however, his stance seems to be similar to that of Heidegger. In a comment on Corbyn's term tawil, which he understands as interpretation from above downward, which is enabling us to experience the sensate world of perception by means of the imaginal world, Hillman says that this kind of interpretation is another way of describing the gift of tongues brought by the dove. The gift of tongues is not some special Pentecostal babbling, but rather a recognition that the dove is forever possible within our spontaneous speech. That speech is a gift. Okay, here we have basically there's a connection for Hillman between language or speaking language and the imaginal. So this speaking as a means of perception that can be described as the gift of tongues. Being able to, language is in a way, being able to perceive, being able to sense by means of the imaginal world. It's another way of describing the gift of tongues. Okay, let's continue. That was Hillman. That was an interlude for Hillman. Avens continues, Heidegger is convinced that language as saying and the expressions used in such language are neither literal nor metaphorical, nor a mixture of both. Okay, he says, to begin, the distinction between metaphorical and literal is generated by the acceptance of the Aristotelian system of distinctions, specifically the bifurcation of the spiritual or abstract and the natural and the concrete. More fundamentally, the literal metaphorical distinction, or the distinction between a direct and oblique sense, is required by the positing of rational knowledge as the aim of thought. Okay, so basically Heidegger is pushing back on all of that. He's saying there is no distinction between spiritual and natural or abstract and concrete, and so the metaphorical and literal distinction dissolves along with that. And rational knowledge is not necessarily the aim of thought. Okay, so that's sort of added on to Heidegger's understanding of language. Let's continue. What does Heidegger really mean by this saying? What Heidegger means by saying is, in my opinion, that of Avens, best exemplified in poetry and myth. Owen Barfield, in his work Poetic Diction, theorizes that on the most original level of language, words like spiritus and pneuma meant neither breath nor wind nor spirit, nor a mixture of these things, but rather had their own peculiar meaning, which has since crystallized into the three meanings specified. Okay, so we're trying to get at what Heidegger means by saying with reference to the work of Owen Barfield. And Owen Barfield is pointing out that when we take these old terms, like for example, spiritus or pneuma, we understand them as having several distinct meanings that have been crystallized. These crystallized meanings of, for example, breath, wind, and spirit. And Barfield is saying that they didn't originally mean that. They were originally one constellated meaning that we can't grasp in its totality. And so Avens says, it is this process of crystallization that has made it necessary to resort to metaphor as a means of restoring the original unity between the perceiving subject and the percept. In a world torn to pieces by pure intellect, the poet imagines and thus reestablishes relationships that are now expressed as metaphor. Okay, so we're trying to ask here, how does the function of the poet, the social function, let's say, relate to the role of language as saying? Well, the way that's being described is that the world has been, in a way, torn to pieces by the intellect, by pure intellect, in such a way that the meanings of terms have become crystallized into distinct boxes or categories. And the poet's job is to imagine and to say and to use metaphor, to poetize and to reestablish relationships between terms in that way. And this is a way of restoring an original unity between the subject and what is perceived. So this is a way of describing the way that language is fallen, the fallenness of language. I would connect this also with dementia. as in there's a way that our there's a way that our culture is literally demented. It's a process of, again, quote, it is this process of crystallization that's made it necessary to resort to metaphor as a means of restoring the original unity between the perceiving subject and the percept. So it's our house of language is fallen and falling down, falling down. The house is falling down. So here, metaphor is remedial. It involves hospice work, I would say. Let's continue with what Avens is saying. He says, metaphor replaces the simple, given, and experienced meaning of things by created, or shall we say, recreated meaning. So metaphor creates meaning. There's a way that metaphor is generative, and it has a mixing, combining, creating quality. Avens says this is the same with myth. So there's a connection here between poetry, metaphor, and myth, as well as obviously with meaning. That as a mode of speaking, Barfield's poetic participation involves saying language in a way which is, in a way, truer to the essence of what language is than the way that we know it. So Avens says it's the same with myth. According to Jung, the thought of the primitives, quote unquote primitives, has no detached significance. It is entirely concretistic and always related to sensation. What we call meaning is enveloped in a wealth of sensuous context. The image is the thing, and the thing is the image. To put it another way, men of quote unquote archaic societies combine what we today mean by literal and symbolic approaches. As Barfield says, our symbolic is an approximation of their literal. Okay, so this is a little bit difficult to try to grok. I think the way that I would understand this is that this way of languaging, this way of saying, is a way of expressing thought that is sensing. So there's a deep connection here between what we language and what we sense, what we say and what we sense, what things are. I would talk about this very close feedback loop between our grouping of natural phenomena into a named cluster. This is a thing, and this is a thing, like that. There's a very tight link between our saying, our languaging, and our experiencing, our sensing. I would also talk about, in the sense of getting back to this, of a remembrance of life, remembering life, a remembrance of life. So saying in this way is designed to remember our terms, our words, to speak in a different way that gives our life back to ourselves. So to remember life in a soulless world, I would say it's to give more body to words, to terms, to bring them down into reality. Remembrance of life in a soulless world. So phenomenology is designed to help us with this by helping us to say, by helping us to speak with more strength, with more life. Avens continues, myths are not metaphorical in the sense of self-conscious creations, but natural expressions of man's being in the world. For example, the Homeric hero is not conscious of the fact that he himself is the source of his powers. He receives them as a natural donation from the gods. The Homeric man must listen to an echo of himself before he may hear or know himself. Okay, let's try to continue and get a better sense for this. Avens says, in the same way, a great poet does not create poetry apart or in opposition to life. but rather as a true or literal expression of things as they are. Okay, so he's simply talking about the nature of myth as a natural expression of our being in the world. It's not something that we make up or that we fantasize, that we just invent. It's something that is deeply expressive of quote unquote the source of our powers. So poetry is not created apart or in opposition to life, but it's a true expression of things in the way that they are. The great poet is influenced to reflect the physiognomy of things through which God speak. Let's continue. In this sense, language does not belong to us. We belong to the gods who address us through language. Far from being a mere tool possessed by man, in addition to many others, language affords man the very possibility of standing in the sheer presence of things. Okay, so I would connect that there is a connection here between myth and language. So this way of speaking, poetic diction, in Barfield's term, is a way of recognizing the divine quality of language. So there's a way that when we can say in this way, which is a deeper way, I would say, of speaking than our normal way, we can, in a sense, give space to or contact or express that which is divine. Or that which has been deified. Okay, so how can this help us to understand Heidegger? Avens says, thus, when Heidegger says that language is rooted in saying, he's trying to recapture what Hillman calls the mythical style of consciousness, or the speech of the gods, who dominate and organize our thinking. So I would say it's a way of speaking from a deeper place. It's a way of like uttering, in the sense that when we use language in this way, it can be more weighty, it can be more full, it can be more, and there's a connection there between the gods, right, and the depths of things, the powerful forces that govern us, what Jung might call archetypes of the collective unconscious. So this rooting of language in saying has to do with the mythical style of consciousness, kind of connected with biblical language, for example, language of like Moby Dick and Shakespeare, Dante, Milton. Quote, the saying of gods does not need an as if. For if we begin in mythical consciousness, we do not need the prefix. So there's a way that he's talking about the metaphorical leap, the as if, acting as if one thing is another thing. But mythical consciousness sort of begins before that. This is a way of understanding metaphor. Metaphor becomes necessary after we've fallen into a bunch of concretized meanings that we then need metaphor to recover our way out of. Myth in some way precedes metaphor. The saying of gods does not need an as if. For if we begin in mythical consciousness, we do not need the prefix. It's implied throughout, always. In spite of his frequent eulogizing of metaphor, and his joining with men like Barfield and Norman Brown in a mafia of metaphor, Hillman would prefer to dispense with the metaphorical as if fiction. Perhaps, he says, the sharp division between literal and metaphorical in our culture is a manifestation of monotheistic consciousness or rational knowledge, where something must be wholly of the one sort or of the other. Okay, so again, they're just wanting to push on the distinction between literal and metaphorical, and Hillman feels that might have something to do with monotheism. Let's keep going. There's only one page. Avens says, on the most fundamental level, language is neither literal nor metaphysical, but belongs to a style of consciousness that is attuned to what the later Heidegger will call the process of physis. More, it's actually a consubstantial with physis in its essentification of things themselves, things as images. Okay, what do they mean by this? We get a quote from Hillman. We're trying to get at what Hillman means by this more fundamental level of language, which is neither literal nor metaphysical, and which is in some way attuned to what Heidegger calls the process of physis. Words used in such a language, according to Hillman, are like angels or powers which have invisible power over us. And here's the quote. It says, they sound their own depths of reflection, allusions, alliterations, etymologies, puns, the guises of rhetoric. These resonances in words are singings of angels. We are in the realm of voices, lunacy, the mind sounding itself, sounding its depths, hearing its essential nature as a choir of voices, discordant, antiphonic responses, the dead souls in us speaking, ghosts swaying on the family tree, the unborn clustered on the moon, all sounding, talking with our voices and listening, hallucinatory. In short, words are the messengers who shine their own silver because they are no longer divorced from physis. Just quickly, by physis, Heidegger understands like an unfolding from itself, a process of coming into appearance, kind of like an emergent process, or kind of like a flower blooming or a waterfall flowing. It's a it's something coming into presence in a certain way, coming into appearance, process of coming into appearance. And so, yeah, so there's a way that words do this. So this is a kind of language, a kind of style of language that involves coming into appearing, the coming into appearance of the things that we're talking about. So you can hear that when Hillman, for example, is giving his quote, that it's sort of invoking those things about which he speaks. It has a hallucinatory, evocative quality. The words I connected were moon, mind, thought, emotion, feeling, heart, and soul. And so, in conclusion, the kind of thinking that's associated with the Heideggerian and Hillmanian conception of language is inseparable from perceiving. It is a picture or imaginative thinking that takes place beyond the subject-object distinction and is available to us today only in the imagery of poets and to some extent in our dreams. In Barfield's opinion, we can only understand the origin of such thinking by going back to the ages when men were conscious, not merely in their heads, but in the beating of their hearts and the pulsing of their blood. When thinking was not merely nature, but was nature itself. When thinking was not merely of nature, but was nature itself. Okay, so this is a little bit romantic and a little bit pre-trans fallacy of a vibe to me. So basically what's being talked about here is a process of recovering the depths of what is meant by language. So if we are, pushing this idea of ecology of practices among a community of practitioners, well, can we learn to speak in a deeper way? Can we avoid the shallowness of our modern propositional tyranny? And the idea is that by understanding a bit more of how these phenomenologists and psychologists such as Heidegger and Hillman, how they understand language as saying, as bringing into presence, then this can be in practice, employed to deepen our sense for the power of speaking, the power of language. So there's actually something that's really practical and important about this, even though it's so far out, right? But the whole point is that we can come to a far, far deeper appreciation of the power of our saying by practicing what is being described. And I'm trying to show just as much as I'm trying to, explain or articulate or describe. It's a remembrance of life in a soulless world. It's bringing body to things. It's bringing language down into its depth. Into a more prophetic or shamanic style. And I'll leave it there. That was quite succinct in some ways, although yes, very complicated. It doesn't have to be, I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to make this accessible because I really want other people to know about this stuff. Maybe a lot of people know about it. I don't know. It's so like look, it seems so theoretical, right? It's so arcane. It's such a minority occupation, but I'm saying no, this can be practiced. We can appreciate this. We can actually do this. It's something that's highly valuable. Why is it valuable? Because it teaches us to appreciate the significance of the power of our words. Another good example of that is go on one of those 10-day Vipassana retreats. Well, after you come back from that, the power of what we say is front and center because you've been silent for 10 days. There's a way that we take for granted our speaking so much that we don't even notice, and that reconceiving of thinking as saying in this way, it can really help us. This was about Heidegger, and it was language as the saying of the gods. This is also clearly connected with the perspective taking stuff about, in a way, giving space to the voice of the divine through us. If we were to take up the perspective of, for example, the Olympian gods, well, imagine that each of them has a different style of speaking that we could invoke or make present in the, that's like in theater, right? Well, there's something about that. There's something about that that can be profoundly beneficial to us if we recover it with intention and care. I'll leave it there.